Γεννημένος στο Long Island της Νέας Υόρκης, ο Σκαραμούτσι μεγάλωσε σε μια οικογένεια της εργατικής τάξης. Ένα υπόβαθρο που διαμόρφωσε την επιθυμία του για επιτυχία. Ξεκίνησε την καριέρα του στην Goldman Sachs, ανεβαίνοντας στον ανταγωνιστικό κόσμο της επενδυτικής τράπεζας, πριν ιδρύσει το 2005 την Skybridge Capital, μια εταιρεία εναλλακτικών επενδύσεων που σήμερα επιβλέπει περιουσιακά στοιχεία δισεκατομμυρίων. Η ικανότητα του Σκαραμούτσι να χτίζει γέφυρες μεταξύ της χρηματοοικονομικής και του δημόσιου λόγου του χάρισε τη φήμη ενός έξυπνου στρατηγικού αναλυτή. Με αυτή την αποκτηθήσα φήμη, το 2017 μπαίνει στο πολιτικό προσκήνιο όταν ο Ντόναλντ Τραμπ τον διορίζει διευθυντή επικοινωνίας του Λευκού Οίκου. Η θητεία του διήρκησε μόλις 11 ημέρες, μια σύντομη αλλά έντονη θητεία που σημαδεύτηκε από αντιπαραθέσεις με μέσα ενημέρωσης και ρεπουμπλικάνους. Μετά την αποχώρησή του από τον Λευκό Οίκο, ο Σκαραμούτσι παρέμεινε μια ισχυρή φωνή στα μέσα ενημέρωσης, εκφράζοντας συχνά την άποψή του για την οικονομική πολιτική και τις παγκόσμιες υποθέσεις. Ενώ οι δεσμοί του με την κυβέρνηση Τραμπ καθόρισαν αρχικά τα πολιτικά του βήματα, έκτοτε έχει γίνει ένας από τους πιο σφοδρούς επικριτές του νεοεκλεγέντος Προέδρου και στήριξε τους δημοκρατικούς στις εκλογές του 2020 και του 2024. Έχει γράψει 7 βιβλία, κάνει συχνές εμφανίσεις στα αμερικανικά μίντια ως σχολιαστής, ενώ διατηρεί και ένα δημοφιλές podcast.
Άντονι, why do you think the Americans voted for Trump? There have been numerous analyses talking about the economic inequalities, the anti-woke agenda. What are your thoughts?
I think I'll just go with the exit polls. You know, the exit polls say three things. They didn't like the inflation during the Biden administration, and even if that wasn't Biden's fault, they still blame him for that. The second thing is the culture. A lot of people in the country feel like the left-leaning culture is hurting the country, and you know that those are really the two big reasons why people voted for Donald Trump. Now, the other thing I would say is, you know, she didn't have a lot of runway. You know, I mean, if they had gone through a process, meaning had Joe Biden dropped out of the race in September of 2023 and they went through a process and picked a candidate and the candidate had more runway, it could have been more competitive. Remember, President Trump won by about 1.5 million votes. And in the swing states, the blue wall states, he won by 170,000 votes. It was a very close election. But there was a couple of big misfirings on the side of the Democrats. You know, Biden said he was only going to run for 4 years, and then he was going to find a successor, and he decided he wanted to run for re-election, and I think that caused a competitive problem for the Democrats.
How do you see Trump's second term? What would be different from his first presidency?
Trump's second term? Well, listen, he's casting the cabinet like it's a reality television show. So, you know, he's got people that he thinks are good on TV, and he has people that he thinks are going to be loyal to him. I'd like to think it's going to be less chaotic. I'd like to think it's going to be more under control. But you know what they say in life, you know, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. So we'll have to see what happens. But, you know, I've registered my concerns. The American people spoke. They voted him into office. I've congratulated him. I wish him well. I'm an American. I want to see him do well. But a lot of his people talk about wrecking the system, you know, the putting stress on the democracy, going after their political adversaries. This stuff would hurt the country, but it would also hurt the U.S. economy. So I hope they don't mean the things that they've said during the campaign.
Do you believe you might be on the list of enemies of the newly elected president? He recently referred to you as a major loser. Do you have any concerns as to what actions might the new president take?
No, I mean, I think when the president's tweeting about you, it's probably a sign of love. You know, I mean, probably on a scale of 1 to 10, I think his love for me is probably 9.5. I mean, you know, you don't tweet about people you don't care about. So, you know, he can call me a major loser. It's no problem. I have had issues with him for the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, just for your Greek audience, this guy, you know, we had a disagreement about something. He started attacking my wife on Twitter. I don't know. I'll ask your Greek audience the question, is that acceptable in the Greek culture? Because it's not acceptable in the Italian-American culture. If you're going to fight with somebody politically, I'm a high-profile person, put the gun on me, don't go after my civilian family members. So, you know, I have an issue with that. I think he's a little bit of a dirty fighter that way. But no, I'm not worried at all. I live in America. We have a tremendous amount of freedom and rights here. I think if he tries to do something like that, I think it would really hurt him politically, and it would certainly hurt the economy. So I'm not worried at all. But if you think I should be worried, maybe you could have a room in your basement. Maybe I could live in for the next 4 years.
You're always welcome in Greece, Antony. Now,
Thank you.
you had a famously short stint, 11 days actually, as a White House communications director. Looking back, what do you think that experience taught you about the inner workings of the Trump administration?
It's Trump. It's a one-man show. It's Donald Trump. And so I think J.D. Vance has been very smart. The election is over 2 weeks ago. I don't think you've seen J.D. Vance anywhere. He's not doing any interviews. He's kept a very low profile. I think it's very, very good judgment on J.D. Vance's part to stay out of the way. This is the Trump show. It was the Trump show in the last administration. It'll be the Trump show in the next administration. I think people that are getting too much publicity or too much attention related to them, I think they'll get knocked out of the box pretty quickly.
The country is deeply divided and polarized. Do you think this will change in the next 4 years?
This country is polarized on a few big issues, but it's fairly unified on certain things, right? Like we want the economy to do better. We want wages to rise for lower and middle class families. I think where we're polarized is we're fighting over the culture. You know, the people on the right, they don't want switch gender people competing with their daughters in athletic sports. They just don't want that. And so they've made that very clear. I'm an open person. I believe that everybody should live free in our society, and they should live, as long as they're not harming somebody else, they should live the way they want to live. But I think that that's going to be a fight in this country, not just today and not just during the Trump administration, but I think over the next 10 years, there's going to be heated differences about the culture. And, you know, just so you know, I mean, the Democrats are waking up. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a very famous high-profile congresswoman, she took her pronoun designation off of her Twitter profile, her X profile, because I think people are tired of that in the country. So you know, we are polarized, but I do think it's related to culture. I don't think it's related to the common things that Americans like, which are rising living standards and prosperity and peace.
With Trump returning to office, what do you anticipate for the U.S. economy, especially in terms of tax policies, trade, and inflation?
Well, I mean, if he, you know, you have to tell me what he's going to do. If he does what he said during the campaign, the economy is going to go into a recession, possibly a depression. You know, if you're saying that you're going to rack up the deficit spending, you're going to cut taxes, you're going to eliminate taxes on Social Security payments, you're going to eliminate taxes on tips, that's $500 or $600 billion of additional deficit spending. Right? We're not taking in the revenues, but you're not cutting services or the U.S. military. So if you do that and then you raise tariffs 500-600%, like he's saying, you'll go into a steep recession. So the market, the stock market, doesn't believe any of that. You know, the stock market thinks he's going to govern as a moderate. The stock market thinks he's going to delayer some levels of banking regulation. He's going to delayer the cryptocurrency regulation. He's going to have tariffs, but the tariffs will be surgical and selective to help protect American workers. Okay, and if he does that, not the stuff that he said in the campaign, but the stuff that we're talking about right now, I think the economy will do pretty well. I mean, we could have a mild recession just because of the cyclical nature of the economy. But I like the chances of us not having one if he runs the government and he runs the regulatory process in the government the way I'm describing.
Do you sense the U.S. should pursue more aggressive strategies to counter China's growing economic influence in the world?
Well, I mean, I think the Chinese have really hurt themselves. It's just my observation. I think and this is a learning lesson for political systems around the world, I think the Communist Party probably took too much control of the commercial and private aspects of their economy. And I think it strangled some growth and innovation and development. And so the Chinese economy is not doing as well as some of the Western economies, certainly not as well as the United States. And so, you know, President Xi has called for a rapprochement. He wants to normalize relations. And I'm hopeful that they can get to a deal on things like trade, and they can get to a deal on fairness for American workers. You know, one of the things that the Chinese are very good at is they team up their government with their private industries. They go into markets, they drop prices below market, and they take market share from people. And, we don't do that in our country, and so I think we have to protect our people. I think the tariffs in that measure are justified and rational. So we have to see. If you're telling me President Xi has consolidated his power, he wants to be president for the next 10 or so years, he's in his early 70s, and he wants to normalize things, I think there's a pathway to create that normalization. So I'm hopeful about that.
And what about Europe? Should Europe be worried that it will be caught in between the US-China fight?
Well, I think they've already been caught inside the U.S.-China fight. I think they've already been, shrapnel. I think the bigger concern, frankly, in Europe is what's going on in Eastern Europe with the Ukrainian situation. Unfortunately, people know in Europe the threat of autocracy, and they know the threat of authoritarian violence. And so, just to remind everybody, Poland was invaded in September of 1939, but the London Blitz didn't start for 1 year after that. And so when a sovereign nation is crossing into the territory of another sovereign nation in Eastern Europe, I think it has to concern people. I mean, there's a reason why Finland and Sweden joined NATO. 74 years, they weren't in NATO. On the 75th year of NATO, they joined NATO.
In terms of foreign policy, do you sense that Trump's priority is Ukraine and Russia? Is it the Middle East? Where do you think that he will point to?
It's a good question. I don't think any of us know the answer to that. So a lot of his detractors feel he's going to force a deal on the Ukrainians and partition the Ukraine and give a large portion of the Ukraine to Vladimir Putin. There's another school of thought that says he's going to explain to Putin that he's got to back off, and maybe there'll be some type of demilitarized zone, some type of buffer, which would be a face-saving thing for Putin. But that war, frankly, from a Western perspective, hasn't been handled well because, these launching now of missiles. Biden's leaving office in 2 months. He's a lame duck. He's authorizing the launching of the missiles today. Those missile launches, Putin should have been told, listen, we can't have this. We have to negotiate a peace. If not, we have to give these people the security guarantees that we promised. They're not part of NATO, but we have to supply them to protect themselves against you.
Knowing Trump's personality and Mark Rubio, who is the appointed Secretary of State, do you sense these guys will be aligned?
So I like the fact that Rubio has been appointed Secretary of State because he's been a hawk on this situation. He recognizes that a territorial advancement by the Russians threatens all of Europe. It doesn't just threaten Eastern Europe, it threatens all of Europe. And so, we're at our best when countries stay inside their borders. We're at our best when we try to find peace and economic activity between each other. We're at our best,
Do you sense that the American Constitution's checks and balances will be a guarantee to ease things, or do you sense that the fact that Trump has control over the Senate, the House, the Supreme Court is a major threat to American democracy?
I have to see. I don't know the answer to that. It's a good question. The thing I can tell you, though, is that they have a 2-year runway. So they have the midterm elections coming up, the congressional midterms. And so if they go off the rails and people in America are concerned about it, they'll stop them. But it's a very good question. We don't know the answer to that, but I don't like the fact that we're talking about it. And I don't like the fact that we have journalists worried about their safety. They're worried about prosecution. I mean, you asked me a very good and a very relevant question. I'm on his enemies list. Am I worried about some type of prosecution or some type of harm to me or my family? Just imagine that. Imagine how disqualifying that is in a free world, in a free country, in the American democracy. If I said, I exercised my First Amendment rights and spoke against the Biden administration, I wouldn't expect recrimination from the Biden administration. And so the notion that there's thoughts behind the Trump administration doing that, I think is quite disqualifying in a democracy. But we don't know the answer to these things. If he's going to threaten the democracy, there'll be people like me that will speak out against it. If we end up getting prosecuted as a result of that, I'm okay with that. I mean, that's we've seen this sort of thing throughout history, but I think it's very important to be on the side of freedom. You know, there's 5.7 million people, 5.7 billion people that live under some form of autocracy. How are the autocracies working out for those people? Not well. Okay, typically autocracies, they funnel the money to themselves and the fellow oligarchs, and the middle and the poor don't do well. Okay, the best system is economic freedom, and the best system, Churchill said, it's a very bad form of government, democracy, until you compare it to the other forms of government. But you have to have some representation for the people, and we'll see what happens. But listen, he's got the card table. He won. He's a very formidable politician. It's a polarized country, but he got 51% of the polarized country. Let's see what he does.
How do you explain the fact that the big tech owners, like Elon Musk, for example, he's probably going to be a member of the government, have supported Trump?
Yeah, I think there's like a 0% chance that Elon Musk is going to be a member of his future government. He would have to give up X, and he would have to give up SpaceX, and he would have to give up Tesla. I don't think he's going to do that. I mean, unless you're telling me we're going to change the rules and you're going to change the conflict rules in the country, which I think would be very hard to do. And I also think would be very damaging to the country. So you can say that a business executive could run their companies and then also have influence in the American government that could potentially benefit their companies. I think it would be a disaster. So I don't think there's any chance that he ends up in the government. Could he end up advising the president? Could he end up on a panel or council to advise the president? Yeah, I think he could do that.
Do you sense we're in a point of history like the 60s where there was too much polarization and division within the country and the pendulum turned to the other side and people voted for Nixon, who had 20 years of a conservative government? Do you think we're in a similar situation in the American history when things are turning to the right until they're in balance?
So that is a great question. And so what I could tell you is that in 2004, when the Democrats lost to George W. Bush, they did think that. And then 4 short years later, Barack Obama came in and they got, 8 years of Democratic reign. The same thing happened during the Reagan Revolution. They said, okay, these guys are going to run the card table for 20 plus years, the way Roosevelt and the Democrats ran the card table from the 30s to the early 50s. But it's hard to know. And I think it's also dependent upon the leadership. If you get a great charismatic visionary leader from the Democrats that can build a coalition, they'll break the hold. These are very slim margins. If you told me Trump won 65-35, I would be more inclined to think maybe something like that could happen. But at these margins, this tiny margin, I think it's really going to depend on who the candidates are.
Άντονι, thank you very much for being with ERT tonight.
Great to be on with you. Thank you.